welcome to the Jeff Bullis Show. My name's Jeff Bullis. Strange about that, but that's why I called it the Jeff Bullis Show. I couldn't come up with anything better than that. But I'm having a great chat today, already have in the back before we got on here, with Joshua. Now, Wohle, is that the correct pronunciation, Joshua, or not?
Almost. Wohle.
Wohle. Because Joshua is originally from the Netherlands, and they are very good at cycling there, apparently. Is that true?
That is correct. I think you get born on a bike.
You do, and you turn up the hospital. Your mum turns up the hospital riding a bike because
Exactly.
they're very fit over there. I do quite well in Tour de France quite regularly, which is one of my favourite events to watch on sport. And I am a mammal as well, which means middle-aged man in lycra. That's the acronym. But enough about me. I'm actually should be introducing Joshua here really. So um, Joshua is a successful serial entrepreneur, technology executive investor. He has started multiple businesses, helping scale them to 150 plus people and generating 100 plus million in revenue. Today he's CEO of Mindstone and a venture limited capital and at Emerge Education, focusing on building a platform that helps people learn faster, remember more, and get things done. And it's good to get things done because if you don't get them done, nothing happens. So it's good. But previously, he was co-founder and chief product technology officer at Super Awesome, and we're going to dive a little bit into that too, Joshua. I'd like to know more about that. Which is the biggest kids technology company in the world and was acquired by Epic Games in 2020. So, it sounds like he should have retired, but decided to do something different. Before that, he was co-founder and CEO at Targets, as well as CJ Online Works, and worked for Richmond International to build their intellectual property database systems across multiple continents. Before that, he was also born in the Netherlands, so that's why he's wearing a lovely pink shirt, I believe. I think it's got nothing to do with the Netherlands, but you should be wearing orange, actually.
I should be wearing orange, indeed. Yeah. Always,
Okay.
always be wearing. Yeah. Always be.
And attended a high school in Switzerland and speaks 5 languages. I'm so jealous, Joshua, that I speak one language poorly. It's called English. And to speak another language, do you dream with another language? Do you dream with other languages?
Yeah. So at this point, it's between English and French.
Wow. Okay. Not Dutch.
No, because I moved out of the Netherlands when I was 13, and then I spent 10 years in Switzerland, in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, which is where I met my wife as well.
Okay.
And so I guess
Okay.
French and English are my best languages.
Okay. Well, you're at least one language up on me. In fact, you're 4 languages up on me. So, after studying computer science at King's College in London, which I believe is a very, very good college, Josh took his MBA at the Open University and since completed MOOCs, which is massive online. Is it how do we? What's the actual acronym
Massive,
mean?
massive open online courses.
Okay, I was close. I got
You were
massive
very
and
close.
yeah,
Yeah.
ranging from the science of learning to the application of artificial intelligence. So, after such a varied educational journey, and having been underwhelmed by many of his educational experiences, he founded Mindstone to help change that. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So, as an ex high school teacher and as an avid reader and taken on lifetime learning, I think what you're doing with the company Mindstone is fascinating. So, what led you into this passionate interest um, of actually education and learning?
So it's a it's actually a fairly complex, or I guess a slightly long journey to it. But it started out by the fact like my parents really could never decide which type of school I should go to. So by the age of 13, I'd done 5 different schools.
Wow.
I
Okay.
then I'd moved over to Switzerland, And there I went through the public schooling system, which meant everything was in French, but I never spoke French at the time. So
Wow.
trying to sit through learning mathematics in French when you don't understand neither the mathematics nor the French is an interesting challenge. Uh,
Right.
then I went through a bit further. I started and dropped out of university twice, once in business management, once in economics. I then moved over to London and I actually finished a degree, so computer science, and then I did my open university degree, which was a remote degree. So, or mostly remote degree. We had like 1 or 2 weeks a year in person, but the rest was entirely remote over a 4 or 5 year period. And at the same time, I'm a self-taught developer. So I've been building apps and websites for years and years, but I I did that, and I created businesses out of them before I ever studied computer science. And so
Right.
the the idea that you can just learn anything you want online kind of for me comes from there. And I think it's very interesting that in the engineering space that's something that happens a lot, but it's not something that happens too often in other spaces. You don't often find a an economist that says that they're entirely self-taught and they have a nice position at a bank somewhere, while you
Well,
have self-taught developers that have great positions in different companies.
and lawyers, you can't do that either.
Exactly. Lawyers, you have the same thing. Right? So kind of there's the personal aspect that came, and that was just there where I thought, okay, there's so much that the internet has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
None of the education experiences that I've gone through personally came anywhere near what the internet has to offer. So what if we could make that experience more approachable and usable to everybody else in the world? What if you
Mm-hmm.
could try and look at that experience of teaching yourself to develop and try and extend it across other domains and see if you can build a platform where people could become lawyers, could become economists based off of everything that you can learn online. So that was kind of just at a personal level. I thought there was something really interesting there. But the second piece, the second reason for me to look at education was that after we had built super awesome to a certain degree, and more specifically when I kind of hit the point where I had some financial freedom and not having to think about where the next paycheck was coming from. It was I was asking myself, where do I want to spend my career? Where do I want to spend my time solving problems? And where can I have the biggest impact?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, there were only two industries that kind of competed with potential impact in the world. The first was healthcare, and the second was education.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, After spending a few months kind of diving into both, I very quickly realized that healthcare was not for me. Reason being that it was going to take me years before I thought I could develop the expertise to be anywhere near useful
Yep.
and actually understand what to build. While with my background in learning, kind of the peculiar journey that I've had, I had much stronger opinions and much um, better intuition as to where I could potentially be useful
Mm-hmm.
very quickly. And so that's where I decided to double down and then started to try and figure out, okay, well, if education is where I want to spend my time, and the impact for me, like there's no industry that has as many ripple effects as education can have, right? If you're able to help people
Mm-hmm.
learn better, then you're having an impact that has multiple layers of impact down the road, because other people can learn better, who can teach better, who can kind of go through. Um, and yeah, and that's where I started, and then start to figure out, okay, well, where, if it is education, then what is the best place to have an impact within the education sector? And that's where we came up with Mindstorm.
Okay. Was there a moment where you're going, like, was that like an aha moment? You're going, was it driven by something that you went, this is what I should be doing? Like you said, that you obviously dived a little bit into, the healthcare section, and then you education. Was it like a book? Was there a conversation? Was there an activity that you go, this is what I really need to do? Did that happen, or was it just like a whisper or just an intuition?
No, so there was actually a interesting you mentioned book, because there was a book that kind of, I'd say, was at the very start of it. There's a book called How We Learn,
Yep.
that was written by Benedict Carey.
Yep.
He is a New York Times science journalist, and he basically put together a book that summarizes in an easy to read format all we know about how the brain works and the various studies that have demonstrated
Yep.
how we actually learn, which techniques work better than others, and
Yep.
why. And I remember reading through that and being really surprised at how simple some of those concepts really were, but how little I knew about them before reading the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then started to talk to other people about it, including education experts, and realized how few education specialists knew about any of the concepts that were talked about in the book. And that was a pretty big aha moment, actually, which was basically, hey, we know more about how the brain works. We know how we can improve the way people learn, but this is not being applied in an education context. Most people have no idea that these are things that we can be using.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, if we could do something to help bridge that gap, we would make an impact. And so that was the first time that I thought, okay, wait, there's something interesting. The disconnect between this thing that could make everyone's lives better, or can help people learn better, and the fact no one really knows about it. Can we bridge that gap? So that was the start of everything. That was about 3 years ago, I think, that I wrote that book.
That's very interesting. So here you are. You've had the experience of your parents not knowing which school to send you to. You were underwhelmed by the education experience. You taught yourself how to code and write software. Um, and so there's this intersection of sort of this experience, expertise, and a discovery that sort of intersected. And so that's where Mindstone came from.
Right.
So Mindstone, in terms of what I understand what Mindstone is, it's about building a collection of learning resources. It's about increasing your focus. It's about then taking that and creating papers and reports, and then developing shared insights. That's the summation I saw about what Mindstone. But so, in terms of the science behind Mindstone, because the trouble with technology used to be that it was all overwhelming, complicated, right? So, tell us a little bit about what your concept, what Mindstone initially was, and has it evolved? So, tell us first about what the initial concept was.
So the initial concept, which we're still working towards, is to enable anyone to learn from all the content that is already available online.
Okay.
So imagine being able to take the 50 best blog posts, videos, and podcasts on microeconomics, and then create a microeconomics 101 course out of that content that already exists,
Mm-hmm.
allowing people to go through that course with the underpinnings of various concepts in science of learning, so to help people learn faster and remember more. And at the end of that course, actually have a proof, a record of their learning, a certificate or something that they can take to an employer, whether current employer to try and unlock a promotion, or a future employer if they wanted a new job. But basically leveraging all the content that we find online in order to create these courses that people can go through, that are slightly more structured and that help them actually go further in life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The product that we have at the moment is the first step in that. And so we're actually, the courses bit is live in a few weeks from now. Because what we
Okay.
first needed to build is the product that we have at the moment, which is which we call Mindstone Insights. And there, at the moment, it is for people that are already curious, that are already going out there, and they're trying to learn from what they encounter day to day online. Again, whether it's a video, a podcast, or an article, you can throw it into Mindstone. So you can save it for later, or you can open it in Mindstone. And then once it is in Mindstone, you're able to highlight it, categorize your highlights. You can add comments. You can have discussions around the piece of content, just like you can on a Google Doc. If you're familiar with Google Docs,
I am. We use it a lot. Yeah.
Mindstone basically. So Mindstone basically allows you to have similar types of conversations around them, but for any piece of content. So whether it's a video, an article, or a podcast online, you can add notes, and then you end up with like a centralized repository of all your thoughts and highlights and important bits of things that you have read online. Think about it as like your little curated part of the internet, that you can get back to. And we needed to build that engine first, that Mindstone Insights, because once we had that, we could then layer on the courses bit, which we're about to release. Because then when you look at these 50 best podcast videos and articles and you go through them, you're not just consuming these pieces of content, but you actually have this annotation engine, this insights engine that sits underneath, so that when you are going through an interesting video, we automatically extract the transcript. You can then annotate the transcript. People can ask questions, others can answer it. And so you end up having a learning experience rather than a watching experience. Like, you think about it, much more engaging, rather than the current experiences, which would be closer to like a Netflix type thing. Most learning platforms today, they just have videos kind of going through and through, and there's not enough real learning happening.
Yep. Yeah, I find that interesting. So the way I learn is by reading. Sure, I watch videos. The problem I have with a video is I can read a lot faster than a video. So the challenge I have is watching a video. If I want to capture a thought, I've got to stop, write it down. Like if I use a Kindle, like I'm reading a book on Kindle, for example, I can highlight and send an email to myself with that. Actually, I can cut and paste and use that as part of a resource. So, and my background is a secondary school teacher, and quite often the syllabus is taught. The syllabus is created by people who've never left school. They're called professors. Never actually done anything. They've just actually taught things. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing like good discipline of learning. But I think there's things like shallow learning, there's deep learning, which I'm just made that up on the fly. But I think what you're doing is trying to get people to take information and embed it deeper and harder into our psyche, and also capturing it. The reason I love reading is that I can read, let's say, 1,000 words a minute, and I can quickly. Otherwise, what I could read in 6 minutes is going to take an hour of video. That's my modus operandi of learning and education. The younger generation prefer a video, and that's fine. We've all got different modalities of learning. So, let me ask you this question. So you're helping people curate their learning and ideas and notes, and then you want to help them create maybe a course. Um, how do you manage the IP for that in terms of this comes from a different source and you're creating a course built on that? How do you manage that IP?
So the idea is that anyone that creates a course obviously has the rights required to build the
Yep,
course and make it available.
yep,
There are many different publishers that are completely happy for the content to be used within this type of learning and educational experience. Actually, there are many publishers out there that their entire purpose is to try and educate, and so they're more than happy for that content to go through. If
with
you
that with
yeah.
attribution, for example. Yeah,
Exactly, with everything is attributed on the platform, and so and
cool.
you can
Okay,
you can get back to the original source very quickly, and like all of
good.
that
Yep.
it is incorporated in the platform. So um, we will see in the future kind of how we can unlock some proprietary sources as well, and if there are interesting things to be done there. But at a high level, we are a platform that allows everybody else to put this together,
Okay. Yep.
and then we try and make sure that obviously the copyrighted material is removed as
Yep.
soon as it's there. And I just wanted to kind of touch on two of the points that you were making before. So the when you talk about trying to really go into deep learning, that's absolutely something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And so if you start to look at how the brain works, like when you think about how we learn,
Hmm.
every new piece of information coming in, um, the amount of connections that your brain is able to draw between the new information coming in and existing information you already have in your brain determines how well and how fast you're able to actually learn it. How likely are you to be able to recall it when you need it, and how you're able to use that information in relation to other circumstances as they arise. And so part of the core of the platform is to try and draw out those connections. Like, why do we ask people to classify their highlights? So it's not just all of this is highlighted, but you actually go through, well, this is an argument, this is a fact,
Okay.
this is something else, and you can have those different types. And so it draws out, it forces you to think slightly deeper about the information that you're engaging with, which then allows you to actually get back to it later.
Okay.
Um, and there are many things like that. And then just a second piece was around the modalities of learning,
Yep.
just because I think it's a really interesting piece. So
It is. Yeah.
there's there's definitely a preference. Like we all have different preferences on learning in terms of
We do.
and that depends on your lifestyle. Sometimes you have a commute. So I mean, not many of us have a commute in today's world at right now, but some people have 20-minute chunks in which they wish to learn. Others do it like some people do it on a run. Some people do it when they're in front of their PC. Some do it on the couch. It all depends. And so different formats can be easier to approach than others. But what is a myth at the moment is that learning styles. It's not like we learn better from reading or from audio or from visual. Actually, we everybody learns better when multiple senses are
Exactly.
stimulated at the
Yep.
same time.
Yep.
And so that is something that I found very interesting as well, because it's there are way too many people that think, well, you know what, I am an audio learner and I only learn from audio. It's like, no, maybe you like audio, and it's very important to know that because obviously if you like audio more, you're fixing for the motivation problem and actually trying to do more of it. So there's a real effect there. But if you were able to find a way to motivate yourself to both have visual and audio stimulation at the same time, you'd actually learn faster.
You do.
Um, and so that's an interesting bit to kind of throw in the mix
Mm.
as well.
Yeah, that is fascinating. One of the best ways I learn is to write. And then out of that, And when I write, I've got to go into, pull something out of a book, I pull something out of a video, I pull something out of, and the thing I really love about writing for me is that I've got to distill the noise of all that information in my head. I've got to put it onto a page and take that cloud of confusion and noise and put it into something simple that are going, will this make sense to someone else? So we're going from almost confusion to clarity. And that's how I work. When I started my blog in 2009, I would start with this like woolly mass of information, and I'd have to put it into an article that then I published and shared later. I had to try and make sense of that noise and that confusion and that cloud of information. And I tell you what, just the art and science of writing for me was one of the best things I discovered. It took me 50 years to work out that I love writing, even though my teacher, when I was 8, said to me, "Jeff, you're a good storyteller." And I didn't believe her until I was 51. So the reality is that that's one of the ways I learn is if I want to try and work out what's going on in my head and in the world, I go and do the reading, I do the research, and then I write about it. And then, so how does your platform take the information and then can you use that to share it with the world, and what sort of formats? And I know your concept was, okay, you want to help create courses. So, and what you sound like you're trying to do is you're trying to get people to make sense of their learning and the resource they have and what they love, and you're trying to help them organize it. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So the idea really is that I mean, at a fundamental level, so we're trying to provide the best experience we can to unlock the learning potential that is available online and try and
Yep.
see how we can bring that to the forefront.
Yep.
So we will have things like being able to clone a course. So if any of your listeners are familiar with GitHub, I mean, this is the developer in me coming out, but
Yeah.
there's
GitHub. Yep.
this.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's this idea of being able to clone a repository, right? Which is that if somebody has built something, you can clone that code. You can basically perform your own tweaks to that base and then publish it again, so that somebody else can take your version of it and they can live in parallel. Both of those can be parallel. You can think about something similar here from a course perspective. If one person goes around and curates a great course on a subject, there are two different ways of making that even better. Someone can propose changes to the course and it can just be updated dynamically and you go through. Or somebody can think, well, okay, this is great, but I think after the 50th resource, I think there should be a branch that goes into another topic before you come back. And you can just clone that course, go through, make your own changes, publish it as a slightly different course with attribution to the first one, obviously, to make sure that all of that is there. But it creates this environment where people can iterate on these learning journeys. And then the best courses get surfaced to the top, so that you end up with a platform that has a community which starts to drive quality upwards, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yep.
those can be shared. Indeed. So when you share the course, other people can take them. When you share individual documents, other people can see your comments, your questions, your answers. All of that is shared between the community.
So, one of the questions that is raised in my mind. So, who's your target audience for Mindstone? Like, who would benefit by using your platform?
So at the moment, we'd have two different ones. The main one would be those that are trying to make sense of a particular topic and want to be want to have an experience that allows them to go deep while still having some structure that's provided by somebody else, right? So they go through a course because someone has done some of the curation work for them, and they want to be able to take that end result, some kind of proof of the fact they have gone through that course, to an employer, whether it is because they want a new job or because they want a promotion going through that, or they just want to dive into a topic that they find particularly interesting, but they don't really know where to start. That would be kind of the first target there. And then there is the second target for those that are in a self-directed and very inquisitive to start with.
Yep.
And they are already going online trying to learn about various topics for themselves, or maybe just in their job they have to consume a lot of information and make sense of it on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
They can use Mindstone Insights to import those resources in their own workspace, and then it allows them to engage with it at a much deeper level, and more importantly, they get back to that information when they need to, so that when you are looking for that particularly interesting section that you read 3 weeks ago on an article that you forgot, well, in Mindstone, you can just look at everything you highlighted in a particular category of the last week, and it will pop out. You can instantly go back to the source of the article that you had. You can have all your thoughts around it that you had at the time. You could even share that particular resource with somebody else who will also have your thoughts around the resource, so that it's not just, hey, go and read this thing, but also, this is a thing I read. Here are my comments. Do you have any other thoughts on it? Right. So people that are kind of already trying to learn themselves and make sense of an overload of information that many of us are exposed to today. There's too much stuff to deal with. How do you try and prioritize? How do you try and retain and use it in the most effective way? If that makes sense.
Yep. Yep. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to help people organise their resources and make sure they're not overwhelmed and can easily access it, and because it's distilled and searchable.
Yep, fully searchable as well.
Okay, right. So what's the science behind it?
Yeah. So I mean, there are many different aspects that we haven't yet implemented, but the two parts that we have are in relation to spaced repetition and drawing out these different connections, as well as recall, actually. So there is an ideal frequency at which your brain is exposed to information if what you're trying to do is to optimize for the retention of that information. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, we have known this in marketing for a very long time. And the idea that you want to see a certain brand just enough times in the same week and in the same month to make sure that the brand name sticks in your head. Like, this is something that marketers will use every day in their job. But for some reason, we're not applying it when we actually want to remember the thing that we're thinking about. So we built in what we're calling a remember feature in the platform. So any piece of a resource, so whether it's a video, a podcast, or an article that you come across that you want to remember, you can just highlight that interesting section, and you can tell the system, I want to remember this. What it then does is that it creates a flashcard for you that it puts on a spaced repetition algorithm, which is that frequency that allows you to remember it. So one click, you can just tell it, okay, I want to remember this. And then 2 days later, 2 weeks later, 2 months later, you will automatically get a notification saying, hey, by the way, do you remember this particular piece? It could be a fill in the blank, or it could be a question, and then the answer is the highlighted passage that you went through. So that's one. It's applying spaced repetition as you are reading, as you are going through a course. The second piece is recall. So again, there's many different studies have proven that, say you have 1 hour available to try and learn a particular new concept. Many people think that they should spend that time reading and rereading, or watching and rewatching the same piece of content until it sticks. That is less than efficient. It's not entirely useless, but it is less than efficient. If you had spent that time uh, partially consuming the piece of content, so reading or watching it or listening to it, and then partially spending time trying to recall what you have just seen, what you have just listened to, and forcing your brain to try and recall it, you end up with much more of that information sticking. So the reason that our spaced repetition algorithm uses question and answer and doesn't use just reread this particular passage is exactly for that goal. And the difference here is not small, by the way. You're talking about 30-40%
Wow.
increase in retention of information. So it has considerable effects when you start to apply this over longer time periods. If you're trying to learn something, you are dramatically accelerating the speed and the amount of information that you can actually retain. And then the third part is drawing out these different contexts and drawing links between different pieces of information. So again, the way that your brain learns and it is by connecting new information with existing information. And so various parts of the platform allow you to draw links between new information and existing information. How does this video that you are reading right now relate to the article that you read yesterday? Or how does this podcast relate to the note that you wrote 4 days ago? Like those are things that the platform brings to a forefront, and it basically incentivizes you to draw those connections. And when you are drawing those connections on the platform, they also stick in your head in a different way. So those are kind of three of the concepts that we have implemented at the moment, but there are many more to come that we are still working on. We feel really strongly about this idea that we can help people not just have a better experience as they're learning, but also to help them learn faster and remember more of what they're doing at the same time.
So you're almost like, sounds like you're taking neuroscience, educational research, and technology, and using that to basically amplify and accelerate people's learning.
Absolutely.
That is fascinating, because the advances in all those areas over the last few decades are just mind-boggling. And I'm still fascinated. Like for me, I am now a lifetime learner. We all think that we go to university and we know it all, and we've arrived. Okay, we've got the ticket.
Yeah.
But you realise as you get a little older that, and especially in an age where change is the norm, it's like what was new today is old news tomorrow and old information tomorrow. So I think what you're doing is just absolutely fascinating. And
Yeah, there's an interesting stat that I tend to come back to. There was a McKinsey report about a year and a half old now, I think, which was talking about the idea that by 2030, about 30% of the skills, sorry, about 30% of the tasks associated with 60% of occupations held today will be automated.
Yep.
And so when you think about it like that, you think about the pressure that that is going to put on everyone that is currently working to update their skills to make sure that the piece that is going to be automated needs to be replaced by something that is not automated, right? Almost by definition, you either replace that or you end up losing your job because the job is automated, right? So that pressure is going to mean that so many more adults are going to go back to becoming lifelong learners, right? The 40 years ago, exactly what you said was the norm. You finish university and you think, okay, now I've got 30 years of working. And the learning, I mean, obviously there was still learning happening, but there wasn't this drive to learn to change your skill set because part of it could be automated. That is new, and that is going to drive a whole wave of innovation in the system for sure.
Yeah, and it's you got to keep moving forward, otherwise you're going to be made redundant. You are going to be a dinosaur, and you could lose your job. like even the technology that is developing around just writing. Okay, so a lot of news items for some of the big platform news items, like sports results and sports writing and reporting, is done by a computer now. It's done by an AI. So, but I think as humans, we're innately creative. All of us are creators, and that's the fun part. But I can see you're passionate about what you're doing because it's basically an extension of your experience and expertise, the intersection of it, and I think that is very, very exciting. So, are you helping people scale building courses? Is that part of what you're wanting to do?
Yeah, so we'll be doing both ends. So we are a platform, right? Where on the one hand, we will help people create these courses, and on the other, we will help people go through those courses.
Okay.
So think about it in a similar way to YouTube, right? Where YouTube will have 0.01% of people create content. Right? The reality is most people go to YouTube and they watch. But there is a part of YouTube which is anyone in the world can upload the content, right? Not too dissimilar from exactly what we are doing here today. Um, Podcasting, very much similar type. And anyone can decide to create something, and then other people can decide to consume that content as they go through. This is fairly similar to how we're thinking about our marketplace. So some people can create the courses, and when I say create, it's really curate the courses
Yeah, yeah,
based off content there, and other people
yep,
can consume it. Yeah.
yeah. It's an area I love. Like, and there are so many careers that are going to happen. Like everyone is worried about losing their jobs or that technology can destroy jobs. The reality is that over time we discover that technology creates jobs. Um, so
Well, I think we have shown that in the last. Well, actually, the unemployment rates have not gone up an enormous amount at all. In most cases, actually have gone down over
mm,
time with more and more technology. So I'm definitely in the camp of thinking that the evidence is pointing towards a real positive change through
mm,
technology. Um, but change is always scary, and with scary, there comes some scary narratives, which are sometimes, for some people, easy to believe, even though the numbers say and paint a very different story.
yeah, exactly. So the big vision? You mentioned two things. Number one, you want to help people become creators and share what they're learning, and then also you want to make it easily accessible to people that want to learn as well. So you're producing two sides of the equation.
Yeah, exactly. So the big vision is really we want to build a world where everyone is empowered to learn what they want, when they want, and how they want,
Mm-hmm.
but leveraging the power of the internet to do that.
Yeah, and it's an amazing tool.
Hmm.
Yeah. So as an entrepreneur, what have been some of the big learnings for you, like about what you've done in the past and what you're doing with Mindstone? People want to start um, a digital business. What have you learned along the way? What have been your biggest challenges and your biggest learnings?
Good question. Um, so the biggest learning tends to be for me was that over time, and this is something that kind of wasn't one particular event, but over time, the idea that if you if you stay around long enough,
Yeah,
you're going to be right at some point. Don't basically rule number. There's one. I think it was a tribute saying or quote attributed to Winston Churchill. I think it wasn't him that he actually said it, but the kind of a quote I live by is that success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm.
Hmm. Love it.
And that resilience, the idea that so long as you don't die, you're going to find something at some point. When I say die, I'm talking here about the startup or the company you're trying to build. So long as the company you're trying to build doesn't die and you don't give up, your chances of being successful are actually fairly good. The problem is that very few people stick with it
Mm.
and many give up earlier. Um, and that is kind of one of the biggest lessons that I still live today. Is just, you know what? It's very hard. And some days everybody tells you just how bad the idea is. And you're looking at your own evidence and you might come to the same conclusion and realize, oh wait, actually this thing is not working. And it's very easy to then just give up and go and work somewhere else or
Hmm.
change project entirely. But if you continue tweaking it and just changing it, making sure you look at the data and just adapting it constantly, then at some point you will get better at it. Right? There's a good book, is it The Lean Startup, which I think is a really interesting methodology to apply as you're building
It
a
is.
company. Um, and it brings much more predictability into the creation of a company. And
Hmm.
so I think that is one of the biggest learnings is just trust the process and continue working at it.
Yeah, I love that term, trust the process. Um, I think we all talk about having a passionate purpose, which is just loving what you do. But I think the other thing I heard from Stephen was it not Stephen Spielberg, it was George Lucas said that you got to fall in love with the process, not just the purpose. In other
Yeah.
words, and that for me was like, wow, that is. In other words, the process of writing, for example, is enjoying the word wrangling, sitting down, doing the work, the process of creating something that you want to share with the world. Doesn't matter if it's a movie, whether it's a piece of art, or whether it's an article or a book. It's the actual process of creating it. You've got to fall in love with the process. And you've talked also about persistence, and certainly for me, one of the things I've learned along the way is you're going to have tough days, but you've got to play the long game. And I've been involved with a startup. We're into our 11th year now. We've pivoted 2 or 3 times, and pivot's a big word used loosely, but the original idea didn't work. The second idea didn't work, but the third concept did. And today there's a company called Shuttle Rock, and we're up to about 200 staff, um,
Oh,
and out of New Zealand. And I've been part of that journey for over 10 years with them, and uh, I've just learnt by watching and being part of that as well. And the founder, you know, Johnny, is just. I've learned a lot just watching him, and I learned so much by hearing stories like your story. Um, so that raises an interesting question. Have you done any pivot since you started?
many, but they are very small. So
Small pivots, okay. Yep.
yeah, so we really try to live by the kind of the lean startup methodology here. We ship very often and
Yep.
we don't have roadmaps. So we by definition do not talk about like what we're going to build in 3 months. Why? Because we believe that so we do an awful lot of user interviews. We talk to the people that are using our platform. We ask them what's working, what's not working, what should be the next thing. And every 2 weeks, we sit down and we figure out, okay, well, based off of our current position, our current context, and the feedback that we're getting from everyone and the metrics that we're getting on the platform, what should be the next thing that we should do? And I always find it very interesting that people talk about being a lean startup. They talk about talking to customers and that they adapt what they're building based off of the feedback that comes from the customers. And then often within a 5-minute period, they'll talk to you about what they're going to be doing next year. And there's a pretty strong disconnection between those two, because if you're telling me what you're going to be building next year, then that basically means that whatever your customers are telling you right now, I mean, it can't happen before a year from now, because you already decided what you're going to build next year. So if your customers are telling you now this other thing needs to be changed, well, where is that going to come in? Is that going to come in 2 years? Instead, what we try to do is every 2 weeks, we adapt that. And so when we talk about pivot, every 2 weeks, we are adjusting the approximate direction that we're going into, and we're looking at what the next thing is. The overall vision, however, is large enough that and non-specific enough, like it's an outcome we're trying to reach, not a product. So the destination is the same, but the exact path on how we get there keeps changing every 2 weeks.
I love it. In other words, you have a data researched evolution of your company.
Yes. I think it was Bezos who was saying, like, be strong on vision, loose on details, or something like that.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. Actually, that sounds really fascinating. But we're launching a new product next few months, and we're using data to assess the name, and we're also and it's an information-based product, and we're using data to assess the topics. The vision is there, the intuition is still there, but we're using data to enable us, and it sounds like you're doing that very much the same. This is really fascinating. Yeah. Is there any, so I'm aware of your time. You're in London. It's an early morning. You're going to get stuff done, and we're just having a chat here. So, what are a couple of things you'd like to share with the audience that you've learnt along the way? What you've had the call, you've started the company, you've been in the cave, you've been initiated, you've had mentors, you've had books. So what would you like to say? What are your learnings you would bring back and share with our audience? And this is a little bit of the Joseph Campbell story.
I was going to say, that's a very, very big question.
Yeah, so what are a couple of top tips you'd like to share with our audience as takeaways that you've learned along the way that you would like to share, that you've learned?
Okay, so the biggest mistake, I guess, that I made, or the thing that I didn't grasp as the company starts scaling and you start to have more teams, it was super awesome. We scaled to more than 150, actually close to about 200 people before that was sold to Epic Games. The biggest lesson for me in there was that trust takes an enormous amount of time to build, and you can lose it overnight.
Right.
Like, we made a big mistake at some point where we had built a culture where everyone kind of felt that they could make mistakes, and that is really important, because it means that, like, when you think about product development very specifically, it means people get stuff out there quickly because they're trying to do their best. But if they do make a mistake somewhere, they know they can fix it, and they'll just the speed at which we iterate is more important than the fact that it's going to be 100% perfect.
Yep.
And so the value of the feedback is really important. And that worked really well until one day we made a big mistake that had big monetary consequences for the company. And instead of using that as a moment to reinforce the fact that, yes, mistakes happen and let's try and figure out how to make less of them happen, but it's totally fine, we made too big of an example of that mistake. And
Yeah.
I can guarantee you, like, it is crazy how productivity plummeted literally the day after.
Wow.
So we had spent 3.5, 4 years building up this culture of rapid iteration and the fact that mistakes are welcome and that you learn from them. And then overnight, we had destroyed it, and it took 2.5 years to get it back.
Right. And to do
It
that,
was,
yeah.
yeah, it was crazy.
Right.
Like, I mean, in the 2.5 years of getting back is mostly because the original people that make the mistake ended up leaving the company, and the collective memory of the company started to forget the event. It wasn't even that people got back into a mindset of doing it. It's just that the collective memory of the company forgot it ever happened.
Right.
And so that's why it took 2.5 years.
In other words, make small mistakes, not big mistakes. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying, like, make if you make big mistakes, don't come down on them hard. Like, big mistakes are part of building a
Okay.
company,
Okay.
and you want to try and figure out how not to make too many of them. But if you do, don't use it as a learning experience, not as an example making experience.
Okay. Right. So that was a mistake. Was using as an example rather than a learning experience.
Exactly. Oh
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. The mistake was not that we made the mistake. That happens. You can't really guard for that. It's going to
No.
happen, and yeah. But what you can do is you can control your reaction to it, and ours was bad.
Okay.
So that was, yeah, that was the biggest learning I took.
Okay. In other words, be willing to make mistakes, but don't make an example of that, which
Yeah,
will basically decimate the culture of the company.
exactly. Mistakes are a good thing.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're actually the opposite should be true as well. If you're not making mistakes,
Yeah.
you're probably not trying hard enough.
Yeah. That's second point. There you go. All right. That's really cool. Joshua, thank you very much for sharing your journey. I think maybe we need to dive back into the first company you built at another stage. That could be fascinating if you're willing to share
Yeah,
that
I'd
one
love
day.
to. Happy to.
I wanted to keep it, I suppose, focused on Mindstone because I think what you're doing in that area is both a personal interest of mine and a passion of mine. And I think what you're doing is absolutely fascinating, and I can see the passion, oozing out of you, and it's, love to hear, love hearing your stories about that, and seeing that what you're doing is the intersection of both your expertise, experience, and passion that turns into something that you want to give to the world. And I'm really so glad to hear the story. And thank you very much for being on the Jeff Bullis Show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun, and I hope it's useful.
So before we go, how can people find Mindstone or contact you or the team? So,
So if you go to mindstone.com,
yep,
you can find everything you want there. If you want to contact me directly, I think the easiest thing is to find me on Twitter at Joshua Wohle. And I am pretty reactive there, so anything you want, get me there.
awesome. Thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure and fun to
Thank you
actually
very much.
share your experiences.